I am thrilled to join you tonight. I'm Poppy Harlow, and welcome everyone. This is a really exciting gathering to talk about Melinda's new book, The Next Day. And I'm so glad you pre-ordered it and that you're here for this discussion. I have been lucky enough to read it. I will admit I read it in one sitting at a cafe. Here we live in Paris now. I sat there for 3.5 hours, ate too many baguettes, and devoured this book because it is that good. As you know, this book by Melinda is very personal. It is very candid. It comes at a pivotal time in her life, in her career. She has left the Gates Foundation. She has left her marriage. She has moved into a new chapter. And this is about the journey, the real journey, what it's really like to move on to the next day. You know Melinda as a remarkable human, philanthropist, businesswoman, advocate around the globe for women and girls. 10 years ago, she started Pivotal, which is a foundation focused on work for women and girls around the world. She was the co-chair of the Gates Foundation, which means that she set the direction and the priorities of the world's biggest philanthropy. And she grew up in Dallas, Texas. She graduated from Duke. She is the mother of 3 children, Jen, Rory, and Phoebe. And on a personal note, I'll just say that I've been lucky enough to interview Melinda for the better part of 15 or 20 years now as a journalist. And this book at this moment has meant so much to me in this season of my life. As I left my job of almost 20 years at CNN, we moved with our family overseas to Paris. And I am in the middle of my next day. So this could not come at a better time for me. I know this book is going to mean a lot to all of you. So without further ado, let's bring in Melinda and get started. Hi, Melinda.
Hi, Poppy. So glad we can do this.
I'm so glad we could too. And let's dive right in. You write, the next day is when the healing begins. And then you say, I never expected to write a book like this. Tell us more. What do you mean, a book like this?
Well, this is a really personal book for me, and it really is about transitions. And you don't get to my age 60, I think, without having been through a lot of transitions in life. But I never expected when I got asked to do the Stanford graduation speech last June, and I started thinking about the class presidents asked me to talk about people leaving room, their peers leaving room for openings in their lives, not just being on one path. And I thought, actually, that's true of me too. And so I ended up deciding I would write a book about that.
You know, I learned early on in the book, a mutual admiration or adoration for the poet Mary Oliver. And you open with some of these words from her poem, The Journey. You write, and there was a new voice, which you slowly recognized as your own, that kept you company and strode deeper and deeper into the world, determined to do the only thing you could do. Can you talk to people who are joining us now thinking, I think I am ready for my next day, or I'm in it? What's your advice to them as you think about that? It's sort of like being your best friend, holding your own hand.
It is, and listening to that place that you have inside of you. A friend gave me this poem, and I kept it in a book. She actually laminated it for me, and I kept it in different books as I was reading different books, and I kept coming back to it and realizing it spoke to me to be true to myself, to go back to that inner voice and really listen to it, because I think there's a lot of wisdom there inside of us, but that we don't always tap into it. And at least for me, I knew I needed to kind of go back and tap into that. And it had been a while.
Are those the whispers you write about? The good
Yes.
advice from Oprah? Who else?
Well, I was lucky enough to interview Oprah last year, and she framed it as a whisper, and that you hear this quiet whisper, but if you don't pay attention to it, it gets bigger and bigger and louder. She says it eventually comes thumping you on the head. She literally does this. And she says it can become a huge problem. And so I realized, yeah, we have to listen to that whisper early on because we do have a lot of wisdom.
You know, I was just thinking about right upstairs in our bathroom here. I have a little like toiletry kit that my good friend Amy, who's helped me through my transition, gave me last summer, and she embroidered on it, "Listen to the whisper."
Oh,
And they became thumping for me. It was like, you have to do this. So that really resonates with me. One of the things that struck me about this book is it really goes back. You dedicate it to your mother and father, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But it goes back to your childhood, and a central part of it is becoming a mother. And I think what struck me most about the parenthood part is how you talk about not only the joy of motherhood, but the fear that comes with it, the anxiety. You talk about an episode where you say it was a maternal love so primal and ferocious it was almost violent. Can you
Mm.
talk about that transition for you that next day?
Yeah, I had no idea it was gonna feel that violent. And I
Yeah.
tell a story in the book, I won't give the whole thing away here, about an earthquake that happened in Seattle shortly after I'd given birth to what is now my Jen, my oldest child. And I realized in that moment of the earthquake that I would have given my life for hers. And it was so primal that I was literally at a point of my mom was staying with us and was helping with the baby. I literally was screaming at my mom, who was downstairs with the baby, cover her, cover her. And of
Wow.
course, my mom knew what to do. She'd been
Of
my
course.
mom. But in that moment, I realized, wow, is this just from somewhere deep inside of me? And you realize you are so attached to that child, you would give them anything.
Yeah. One of we have, by the way, like really great and thoughtful questions from some of the people who pre-ordered your book that are with us now in the room joining us today. So let me just get to one of them that I think is interesting because Manuel wrote, how do you know when it's time for the next day or the next chapter of your life? And that gets to the question of motherhood, right? That was you plan to have children, yes, but you never necessarily know when they're going to come, right? It's a next day that is different than some of the other next days that you talk about in the book. So, how would you answer Manuel's question about how do you know when it's time for that next day?
Well, sometimes the next day just happens to you. So
Yeah.
I had wanted to get pregnant. I got pregnant a little bit earlier than I'd planned, but truly the next day in that journey for me, I was put suddenly, my blood pressure went up. I was put on bed rest 3 weeks before the baby
Oh,
came. And I left work that day. The doctor said, "You are
yeah.
not going back, or I will put you in the hospital." So sometimes the next day just happens to you and you realize you're in it. And other times you are planning for it. And that is why I talk about cultivating that inner voice or planting parts of yourself in your friends because they can remind you at seminal moments, hey, maybe this is time for a change, right?
Yeah. So let's talk about friendship because that is a recurring theme through the book. Our listeners, our viewers are going to discover how wonderful your dear friend John was and what a crucial part of your life he was. And your, can I call them your walking friends? Your
Sure.
your
Yeah.
friends that you go on the walks with. Can you speak about friendship as it pertains to your next day in life, both the planned next days and the totally unplanned next days, and how they help us sometimes get there?
Yeah. So John was a dear, dear friend of mine at Microsoft in our 30s, and he got cancer unexpectedly and passed away. And that was not a next day I was planning for. But I got to walk that journey. And I talk about that in the book because I learned a lot about how you want to live your life, how you want to live the end of your life from his experience. He left behind his wife, Emmy, three very young children at the time. Emmy is still one of my dearest friends, and she's part of my walking group on Monday morning. And they're three female friends. We walk every Monday morning, rain or shine, often rain in Seattle in the winter when we're home. And having a long, enduring friendship, you do, as I said, you plant parts of yourself in those people. You're willing, at least I'm willing, and they are willing to be incredibly vulnerable during,
Mm.
tricky times in life. You're raising children, they become teenagers, they launch. But those friends are there to witness the key moments in your life. And I think also we help one another when we're going through transitions. In Emmy's case, through her grief after John. In my case, the grief that I was going through in deciding to leave my marriage, etc.
Well, let's talk about that because the way you write about it is so beautiful and touching that you helped her cross that bridge when John died, and she helped you cross the bridge in your grief when you decided to end your marriage. Can you talk about those around you that helped you make that decision? Though you write about ending your marriage as a decision you needed to make alone, but also with a lot of support.
With a lot of support. And the reason I even chose to write about that in this book is it is about transitions, and people knew I had gone through it. So it'd be disingenuous not to write about it. And unfortunately, many people do go through a divorce. It is very painful. It is
Mhm.
something that I think only you can make by yourself, but when you're making the decision, at least for me, it was an incredibly thoughtful and prolonged decision, and I had a few close friends that I was willing to even share with that I was considering this, and they could remind me both the good things in the marriage, but also the things that they knew had been challenging, and I could hear myself think about it and wrestle with the decision that was at hand.
Can you talk about your decision, Melinda, to include that part of your life? I mean, what's not fair about being a public person is that your personal headlines are always shared with the world.
Mm.
But you could have written this book and left it out, right? But you made the brave choice to say, no, I'm going to address this. And I just think the amount of people that's going to help is really significant.
Well, I hope so. I wanted to be vulnerable with this book and I wanted to be
Okay.
authentic because I felt I had learned so much through these very significant transitions in my life. Many of which are in the book. I really thought that if I didn't include it, there was no way to be on. People would say, "Well, why didn't she include that? That was a big
Yeah.
transition." And I also knew, unfortunately, about 50% of families go through it. So I felt like I had learned some things, authors that I had reached for. I talk about therapy, I talk about my friends. And I thought maybe in sharing that, it might also then be helpful to others. And the thing I did learn through the process is that you can grow during it too, even though it's painful. And it builds a lot of resilience in the end too.
It's true. Sometimes we surprise ourselves with how strong we can be, I think. We don't even know it.
Or how
So
much courage
talking
we have, both.
Oh, right, that's true. I call this my year of doing scary things. Like, I
Mm,
don't even like to fly, I don't like turbulence, I'm more like keep my feet on the ground kinda girl, and this year I've decided to do many
mm.
many feet off the ground scary things, so I understand that. You write about therapy, and I think that's important for us to talk about. Yes, it's become more accepted, more mainstream, if you will, but there is still a stigma for some around therapy. I think especially maybe for men more so also. And you write that therapy made it possible for me to respond to the betrayals in my marriage without betraying myself in return. But therapy helped you with a lot, even beyond that. For how many years has it been now?
Over a decade now. Yeah.
Yeah. And you were hesitant, right? At first.
Very hesitant, very hesitant. I would say even resistant at at some level. And I talk about in the book that it wasn't the first person I was with didn't quite work out for me. It wasn't quite a match. I had to change, or I felt I needed to change. But I was so grateful for, again, a trusted friend, not in my walking group, but who could see kind of what was going on. And she was the one that was kind enough to say to me, I think you might want to try this. I think it might be beneficial to you. And so and now I think back and I think, what a gift. Like candor between one another is a gift when we tell each other what we really see. And so she
Uh-huh.
got me thinking about it. And even I could ask her, well, how do I go about finding one, et cetera. But it's been seminal for me. And I write about it again to hopefully destigmatize it for people.
I love how you describe yourself as a recovering
Mm,
perfectionist and that your word, which I'm sure therapy was helpful
mm.
for, and your word of the year this year is discovery. I think this goes to Beth's question, one of our soon to be readers, and she wrote in, I'd love to know what you would say to your 20-year-old self. What advice you would have given yourself?
Oh, I would go back. I would give myself the advice that you know yourself even better than you realize at this age. And I think I knew that coming out of high school, but then I got to college and you start, at least for I did as a woman, I started to hit some barriers in college. There weren't very many
Yeah.
men studying computer science. The way some of the young men acted in the classroom, just shouting out answers, was very different than my Catholic girls' school, right? And so I started to, just slowly but surely lose some pieces of myself, and particularly when I went in the workforce. And so when I look back, I would say to myself, you know yourself really well, hang on to that.
That's interesting. The talking about sort of maybe the way to put it is the path to our next day is not a straight line because you write about sort of losing your inner voice for a while, for years.
Mhm,
And it's the inner voice that helps us find our next day or get to the other side. How do
for
you
sure.
re-find it when you've lost it?
I think I'll say for myself, I refound it again by being in therapy, talking to good friends, journaling, really paying attention to that inner voice about what is hard here, what's easier for here in this situation for me. When do I find joy? When do I not find joy? Even who am I around? Maybe you're around some people that end up being a bit toxic, right? Do I need to be around those people? Is there a way to reframe and move over towards this other group of people I like better? All of those things helped me find my way.
Stacy wrote into us, I've entered my next day 6 months ago when I retired. This is a big next day for people
Mhm.
retiring from careers. It
Mhm.
can be defining in some ways. And she writes, in spite of having realistic plans and goals that I am executing, I still feel a little ungrounded. Do you find it hard to get to know your new self?
Definitely, and I have to push my new self all the time.
Like what? Like in what ways?
Like, push myself to set a new goal around exercise or to meet somebody new or to try something different, right? At least for me, I need to kind of what I call lean forward instead of lean back when there's a little bit of doubt. And so in these openings is when I try to really go forward and learn something new or have a new experience. I'm spending a lot more time learning about ChatGPT, just using it, right? That's been a lot of fun actually for me, but I was hesitant at first because it's a new
It is
tool.
fun.
Yeah.
My husband sent me pictures today. Apparently, there's this new open AI like photo image thing. I don't know. I got many funny pictures of myself by AI today.
Someone sent me one too, and I was like, "Oh,
Oh,
okay, there's a
yeah,
cartoon drawing of me and somebody else, all right."
exactly. So, pushing yourself, is it getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, which is not something I like to be, but I've been a lot of it this past year?
Definitely, and I feel like if I practice being uncomfortable in little ways,
Mhm.
it makes it more comfortable it makes it more comfortable to be uncomfortable in big ways. So I'll give you an example.
Interesting.
I'm
Yeah.
claustrophobic, so I love to
Okay.
snorkel, but scuba diving is just much harder. I have to be calm, it has to be a clear day. But I'm pushing myself to do it more often, even on not as calm of day or even and it's not as clear, because getting over that and then realizing I can get through that uncomfortable time of claustrophobia and then find the beauty in it. You see new things underwater, but just literally practicing in that way is helpful for me.
That's so interesting. Do the things that scare us
For sure.
because it can help us. So I loved this question from Emily. It's about faith. And many people will know you are Catholic and faith has played a big role in your life throughout. She writes, in transitioning to this new phase, how much of an impact has your faith tradition played?
I would say it continues to play a big role in my life. I believe in spirituality, so I've let go of some of the rules of my Catholic religion that I don't completely agree with. Um, but the spirituality component and making sure that I continue to nurture that and do spiritual readings. I talk about in the book, I'm in two different spiritual groups, non-denominational, but really making sure I cultivate that and continue to, that's been huge for me, particularly during these hard times.
Yeah. I think I have a lot of these conversations, especially with my mother who has a deep faith. And she talks about for her and thank God is always by your side. And you always have someone holding your hands even when you feel very, very lonely. This gets to another thing that you write in the book about the unfamiliar. And you talk about treating the unfamiliar as a teacher instead of an enemy. I read that as sort of being curious instead of scared or like holding things off, like the way you write about going into a meeting over prepared is how I used to go into every interview. And now I've sort of just learned to like relax and be a little more curious.
Exactly, and if you can relax and just kinda be yourself, it just sort of takes the temperature down in the room, I find for myself and for the other person, and really what people respond to is kinda less the facts and figures and did she do it perfectly, and more, I think, the humanity of it, and it took me a while to learn that, and to lean into that unfamiliar. I often use an analogy in my own head of, okay, well, whenever you're learning a new language, it feels
Uh-huh.
really uncomfortable at first. You don't know the verbs, the adjectives, how to parse something, what the words are, but eventually you get good at it, right? So if I can use a small example like that in my head, then it helps me with these other larger times.
It's interesting because I'll never forget something you told me, well, more than a decade ago, I think, talking about some of the work you were doing with the Gates Foundation overseas. I think this was an example in Africa. And you talked about how you said, Papa, you need to let your heart break. You have to be proximate to the pain and let your heart break. And I felt like you were always very vulnerable talking about that work and just showing your humanity, especially on the
Thank
ground
you.
with the people you're helping. But I can also imagine walking into rooms with world leaders all the time, heading the Gates Foundation is completely intimidating.
Very. I would walk into rooms with presidents and prime ministers, and you'd think, how am I going to connect with them? Are they even interested in this issue? But I always try to connect with them on some human level. And if you do that first, then I find you start to build a little bit more trust so that there's an opening for the discussion they want to have and you want to have.
That's so true. All right, so let's talk a bit about career transitions because another next day that I don't think ever saw coming, Melinda, was leaving the Gates Foundation that you co-chaired that bore and bears your name. But now within the last year, right at age 6, deciding to leave and focus fully on the pivotal work you do for women and girls around the world. How did you take that next step?
Mm. Well, certainly at the time my divorce was finalized, I did not think I was going to leave the Gates Foundation. And but over the course of time, I just realized there were some pieces of work I really wanted to do that would be easier for me to do on my own. And it just felt like it was the right chapter for me of my life for me to move into my own philanthropy by myself. And one of those seminal things that happened, one of several, but one was that, the Supreme Court overturned a huge law on our books that we had had as girls and women. And the fact that my granddaughters would grow up in a world where they had less rights in the US than I had, that made no sense to me. And so I felt I was ready to step out on my own, start into my next chapter and do philanthropy in this way, really dedicated to women and girls.
So that June morning, the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade. And did you know within a matter of days, I'm going to have to step out on my own here to use my full voice because now you're completely in control.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no one else that has to say, Melinda, we can do this, we can do that. You call the shots.
Yeah, which is just a good feeling. It's
I
new
bet.
and sometimes it can be a little scary. Do I know what I'm doing? Okay. I co-founded a foundation. I probably do. Um no, it was not on that day or that moment. Again, it was kind of a coming to. And as I got closer to my 60th birthday, I just realized, okay, I'm starting a new decade and I was just ready to do it on my own. And I felt like the Gates Foundation, the other thing I should say is I felt like it was in such a good place. Really great leadership, a strong board, Mark Suzman, the CEO, completely believing in him and trust in him. So I felt like, oh, I'm lucky enough that I can do this and that institution will be okay.
Mary wrote in, what strategies do you use to embrace uncertainty? I like the way she put that. Embrace uncertainty, not just hesitantly accept it, but embrace it. And she writes, how do you conquer the fear and anxiety when it seems like everything is changing in all the wrong ways?
Mm. I constantly try and go back and remind myself of another place in life, earlier in my life, where it felt like everything was changing. And like, you have that, at least sometimes that panicked feeling like, can I get through this? I would go
Yes.
back and remind myself, I've had this feeling before, but look how it worked out. It might have taken 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, a year, but that worked out okay. So I think sometimes going back and having those touchstones, at least for me, has been helpful.
And what about Diane's question about what point in your journey, she writes, did you realize what you were experiencing would benefit other women? And what was that moment like that inspired you to write about this chapter in your life?
Well, It really, if I go all the way back, it would be 2012 when I realized the
Okay.
experiences I was having on the ground with so many women in all kinds of countries, but a lot of low income countries, was when I really awoke to my voice in the world used on behalf of them might be able to create change. And when I finally accepted that, embraced that, and started to move towards using my voice more, it became kind of an unfolding journey. And then again, as I was asked to do this commencement speech in June, and literally one of the class presidents said, "Can you talk to us about leaving room for change and openings?" And I thought, oh my God, that's kind of exactly where I am in life. Maybe I have even more to say than what I'm putting in this speech. And that's what spurred me on to realize, oh, I want to write a book about lots of transition.
Yeah. Wow. I'm glad they asked. I'm
Me
glad they
too.
asked you to do that commencement. One of the great questions that we got from Janice is about joy, and it's my favorite word. Grace and joy. Grace,
Mhm.
because I think we need to give it to each other more and ourselves more. But joy, because I find it to be different than happiness. You can
Very.
have a life of joy and also be sad at times. But Janice writes, what things do you do to stay motivated and positive to find joy when you see all the problems we're facing? And for you, that's probably pretty acute given how keenly you're focused on those most in need around the world.
Yeah. I think it's really important to cultivate joy, and we can. So we can cultivate joy by specifically putting things in our day that give us joy. So for me, I love to be out in nature. So I try to open the doors somewhere in my house or the window in the morning, or even if I'm in a hotel room, try and open the window, get the
Yeah.
sounds of nature around me. That helps me. It can be sending something to a friend that might uplift their day, or a friend sending
Mm.
something to me. And then I read this book back around 2010 called Awakening Joy. It's by James Baraz and Shoshana Alexander. And they talk about cultivating joy. And they say, look, when you have something joyful, don't hold it in, share it with someone else, because sharing your joy doubles it. And I think that is so true. And it taught me, like, share my joy. If I get a fun photo from one of my kids, oh, share that with somebody else, right?
Yeah, I left your book feeling joyful. I mean, you
Good.
talk about really difficult
Mm.
situations, but I think it made me, and I think it'll make your reader feel heard and understood in a unique way. But I left with a feeling of joy, not a feeling of sorrow. If that makes, I don't know if that makes sense
Yeah,
to
I
you, but
hope
you,
so.
yeah,
Because one
yeah,
of the things I'm trying to show with all these transitions, including the death of my friend,
yeah.
leaving a career, leaving a marriage, is that if you allow yourself time and space to make those transitions, you will grow. You'll learn things about yourselves. You'll learn things about your friends. And that, at least for me, has just created this whole sort of bucket or well of joy on the other side that I never expected.
How did you make that space? I mean, I'm assuming your calendar is a little bit more full than most of ours. So what did you do to actually make and not just professionally, yes, but also you've got three children, two grandchildren, right?
Mm, yeah. But
How'd you make the space and the time?
they give me a lot of joy. It is different when your kids are adults and in their 20s. They need less of you than the stage, for instance, you and your husband are in.
Yeah.
And then you just get a lot of joy from them and the grandkids. But I made space. I've just been very purposeful about making it in the morning before I come into work. Um,
Okay.
and then also some usually in the late afternoon or evening. Like I even make days that I'm not seeing anybody in the evening just so I can have some time and
Good.
space, you know?
What
Just
do
to
they say? Nothing's better than a canceled plan.
oh my god, it's the
Canceled
that is
plans.
the best sometimes. It's like, "Oh my gosh, I just got an opening on my calendar," and not to fill it right away, like, just enjoy it and lean
Yeah.
into it.
Do you have a morning you talked about gratitude, I'll see if I can find it here. I have, my mother gave me this journal, gratitude because you talk about journaling. So this is my morning routine. I wake up and I come to this room before anyone comes down. I write in this gratitude journal, and last thing I do before I go to bed, and I started meditating, Melinda. After
Ooh.
not having to anchor a morning news show anymore and read the newspaper first thing, now I meditate for 20 minutes before I read the newspaper. And anyways, that routine has helped me find joy, and I wonder if you have a morning routine or something you do that helps you find
I
joy?
do. I'm like you, I try to meditate in the morning, and I learned from a really good friend, don't beat yourself up. Like, don't say, "Oh, I only did 10 minutes instead of 20, or I only did 20 instead of 30." Say to yourself, "I've done what I can today." And every little drop in the
Yeah.
bucket is helpful. So I try to meditate in the morning and take quiet time. And again, for me, that's often in nature. Even when it's cold in
Yeah.
Seattle, sometimes I'll walk in the bare grass in the morning, or this
Mm,
morning, there are lots of things blooming. The dogwood is blooming, the magnolias are blooming. So I try to focus on those for
I
a little
love it.
while, or the new birds that are, have migrated through.
Oh, the chirping, the sun came out in Paris after 6 months of rain. And so now to see the sun in the morning and listen to the birds is amazing. It reminds me of John Kabat-Zinn, which I read
Mm,
his book about wherever you go, there you are in the last year. And you write about it as well, talking about embracing just like where you are, and that is where you are meant to be. I wonder how you
exactly.
think about that.
Yeah, and it's partly for me is just acceptance. Acceptance of
Yeah.
yourself, acceptance of your situation. Even if you wake up and it's a day where you feel cloudy inside your brain, like, "Oh god, I'm more tired than I thought," or I'm a little down today, or yesterday I was more joyful when I woke up." Okay, just accept where you are. And if you accept that, then and recognize it, then I just find the whole day is easier instead of trying to beat
Yeah.
myself up. Oh, I should
Change
be
it.
more something else today.
There is this beautiful idea of coming home to yourself.
Mm,
And I have to say, when I read this
mm,
at that cafe with all the baguettes, I
mm,
burst out into tears.
mm,
And it's the poem. Do I pronounce it Maya?
mhm,
Is that right? So let
mhm,
me just read this for people. I hope when you come home to yourself, there are flowers lining the front porch that were left from all the women you were before.
mm.
What does that mean to you?
It means that whether we realize it or not, we are constantly planting and building upon ourselves. And there are just these beautiful phases in life where you've put down these flowers and maybe you've moved away from one and then you're coming back to it. But you realize even the ones that maybe aren't as beautiful as some of the others, it was a hard period of your life. If you try and examine all of them along your path, you realize that has built a life. And it's really,
Wow.
really beautiful. Somebody once said to me, "You're painting on your own canvas of life." And I've
Mm.
often thought that's true. Only we can paint the colors on our canvas. No one else can. Even the dark spots and the beautiful spots and the, ones where there's growth, all of that together makes a beautiful picture of a life.
Yeah, it does. So this book is dedicated to two very special people who we learn more about in the book, which is wonderful. Tell us who you dedicated it to and why.
I dedicated the book to my mom and my dad, and they are 84 and 86, still very healthy. I'm very close to them, see them often. Um, and it's really because of the values they instilled in me and my three siblings growing up. We really grew up in a very middle class household, but there were these values there that they lived and we lived. And they believed in all of us. They wanted us to all go to college. We could look around and see it wasn't going to be easy for them to send us, but they took on the debt. And I talk a lot in the book about my dad having a perspective on me. I call it, he was my small wave to my big wave. There's an analogy I use in the book. But he could see, even when I couldn't see, he could see that, okay, not only is she and my sister good at math and science, but once I started to pursue computer science, he literally said to me, "IBM should hire you. They would be silly not to. You're one of the few women in computer science." I couldn't see that about myself, right? I was nervous about, can I even get a summer job? And he was like, "Of course they're going to hire you." So having someone else hold that perspective while you go through your own fear and your own work to move towards something you want, wow, is that just so helpful.
Well, Microsoft's the one that got lucky. And I mean, for people who don't know, but you rose up so high there, you were managing like almost 2,000 people at one point, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, like, just, I don't want to give away too much of the book, but there is this incident with nail polish. How dare you at school? And I bring it up because it showed the impact your father had on you and your confidence and your
Mm.
strength and who you were really at an early age. So I just wonder if you could share the feeling that you got for parents who are joining us who might think that their children don't take in everything they say.
Yeah, I won't give away the story per se, but
It's
my
so good. Yeah.
father stood up for me and for my mother when the priests who ran the church, and I went to the school that was part of that church, had a rule about us not wearing nail polish. And I won't give the whole thing away, but it was pretty ridiculous that I got not only singled out, but my mom was going to have to come take care of it. And instead of my dad, when I go home that night being upset about it, he's upset at the priest because he says, that's ridiculous, not only for you, but for your mother who has two young sons at home to have to come show up to help you out for something that makes no sense. Right. And so it also taught me that we can push back on man-made rules, but having a father who believes in you and a mother who believes in you both, wow, was that powerful for me.
Melinda, what do they think of the book? They've read it, yes?
They've read parts of it. I get my
Oh,
hard
okay.
copies tomorrow, hardcover copies, and I've promised them that I will overnight mail one to them tomorrow. But they've read the parts that
Okay.
they're in and they love it.
Okay. So Melissa wrote into us, what has been your favorite part about writing the next day?
My favorite part has been the reflections, just going back, like I write about some of the goals I had as a high schooler, which now I'm almost embarrassed to write them down. But to go back to these parts in life and just see kind of how your life, at least for me, reflecting on how it got built and how I got where I was. And most importantly, the seminal people in my life and being able to honor them. That felt great.
And from Lee, this is Lee's question. What is the single most important idea that you hope readers will remember from this book?
That during periods of great transition, there can be huge growth for you. And don't rush from one thing that you're leaving to the next one. If you rush, you're going to miss the lessons in between. So stay in that space, and you will find that there's so much growth and potential there. And then ultimately, potentially resilience.
That's so interesting. It's like sit in the uncomfortable, whether it's don't jump from relationship to relationship, or maybe if you now look, I really appreciate you address your privilege throughout this book, right? For many people, you leave one job, you have to be in the next one the next day.
Totally.
And so just to acknowledge that. But if you have the fortune, the luck to be able to sit in something for a while, it sounds like you're saying do it, even though it feels really uncomfortable.
Yes, exactly. And I am absolutely privileged that I don't have to jump from one job to another or even work. But even to
Mhm.
just make times, like when you have a new baby and you are overwhelmed, you're tired, the baby's crying, and there are beautiful moments. But if you can even take 5 or 10 minutes in your day to say, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky to be a new parent. I'm lucky I could have a baby. And to even cherish some of the moments, write down just one or two things. It'll help bring joy to that huge transition you're going through in life.
Can you talk about the it seems like the decades are very important for you, Melinda. When you were 50, you
Mm,
started Pivotal, right?
mhm,
At 60, this.
mm.
Talk about the difference though between the next day when the changes you made at 50 to now the decisions you're making at 60.
Well, I think when I turned 50, I knew I was on the back half of life. I literally said it to
Yeah.
my friends. I said, we just have to acknowledge we are on the back half of life, right? And I didn't feel particularly old at 50. I don't feel particularly old at 60. But I felt like I needed to acknowledge that because I could see the years ahead that my kids were going to launch, and I knew I was going to be an empty nester. And then at 60, those transitions had already happened, and it was,
Yeah.
oh, here I am, but I'm ready to start something new. And so, I don't know, at least for me, the decades are kind of markers, and I prepare for them ahead of time. It's not like they just happen to me.
How do you prepare for them?
I think through them ahead of time. Like I think now, where do I hope I will be at 70? right? What do I hope my
Where do
health?
you hope?
Yeah, where do I hope my health will look like? Hopefully, I'll have more grandchildren. I don't have much or any control over that. Hopefully, my work, I will see some of the seeds that I've been laying. Hopefully, some of that will come to fruition by the time I'm 70.
Yeah, I have no doubt all these things will come true, Melinda. We are close to out of time. Is there anything you want to add before we wrap up?
Well, all I would say is just I wrote this book to remind people there are so many openings in life. And sometimes we go through a transition and it's exhilarating, exciting. Sometimes it's scary. But ultimately, by letting go of one thing, you're creating space and room for something else. So if you can take some time in there to connect with friends, with authors that you've read, and take a little bit of space to yourself, I think you're going to find that you come through the transition even a bit more easily.
I love that. I call them here in France, nouvelle porte, new doors. And I take pictures of doors all around the world for some reason. And they remind me that they're there to walk through if we choose to walk through them.
Beautiful.
So Melinda, thank you very, very much. And in closing, for all of you, I'm so glad you joined us. You're going to get the book very soon. I think you're going to devour it in one setting, just like I did. And on a personal note, Melinda, just thank you for asking me to moderate this and to share your work with me. It's been a joy. And I've always deeply admired you as a journalist and as a woman. And I can tell you this book has helped me a lot. I know it's going to help so many people. So congratulations. Take a little time to bask in the joy of what you've created for so many.
Thank you, Poppy, and all my best to you and your family during this time in Paris.
Thank you. We'll see you soon.
See
Bye,
you soon.
everyone.
Bye.